Hey everybody, it's Dolly. Have you ever read Warrior Cats? A book series about a bunch of cats that live in the woods and fight. They fight a lot, actually. There are a ton of books in this series. I've read about 40, but there's still so many more. When I was young, I was given someone's whole collection, so that was about all I read. Well, that and Pokemon Adventures. And surprisingly, despite how obsessed I was with this series, I have never drawn any recent Warrior Cats fan art. So today we're gonna fix that. I wanted this to be a type of Warrior Cats fan art that I hadn't really seen a lot of, so I came up with the idea of making them look like they're from an 80s cartoon, like Care Bears. I'm going to be doing 4 different cats today, so let's get started with the first one, who is also my personal favorite. Firestar is the main character of the beginning of Warrior Cats. He was originally a kitty pet, meaning he was owned by people, until he decided to move into the woods and become the leader of ThunderClan. Oh, by the way, ThunderClan is the, Gryffindor of Warrior Cats. There's 4 different clans. And I know what you're thinking. Firestar is your favorite character? He reminds me of, early 2000s RPG protagonist, if that makes sense. For Firestar, I mostly had to work off of my imagination, because in the books, he's not described too terribly. It's just kind of like he's red, and he's got green eyes. That's Firestar. Granted, there are some official images of him. I really like the one where it just looks like he's screaming. So I very much tried to give him a main character design, if that makes sense. I made him a little bit sharper than the others, and I gave him a very, proud, confident stance. I didn't really want to give him stripes like he has in some of his official images because I felt like it would kind of overcomplicate the simple 80s design, but I did give him 2 little stripes on his forehead. I also added a tiny little star in the middle of his chest, signifying that he is indeed a leader. I do like it when people use stars to signify that they're leaders. Sometimes people will just have it right in the middle of their forehead. That's pretty funny to me. I wanted to go for a kind of Braveheart from Care Bears look for him, who, funnily enough, has a name that sounds like it could be a warrior cat. And then I just add some very simple shading that looks like it would be in an 80s cartoon, just slightly airbrushed kind of look. And he's done. This is definitely what I thought he looked like while I was reading the books, so I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. Graystripe is Firestar's best friend from the very first book. He's a very important character, and he's another one of my favorites. I mean, I couldn't really do Firestar and not do Graystripe. You can't separate the two. For him, I knew I wanted to make him super fluffy, because that's always how I had imagined him, and I wanted to give him actual stripes, because for some reason, he doesn't have stripes in a lot of the official images. His name is Graystripe. So, as far as his description goes, it mostly just describes him as being gray, having stripes, and having yellow eyes. But I felt that the stripes gave me a lot more of an idea of where I wanted to go with him. I wanted him to look very cuddly because his personality is very friendly and outgoing. I also wanted to give him a very big tail in comparison to Firestar because I thought it would be a good way to differentiate their designs, especially since they would usually be seen together, so you would need to have them look very different from each other, so even from far away you could tell who was who despite the colors. I also wanted to give him this random tuft of hair on his head, because that seems to be a thing with 80s movies. It's like, why do they need hair right up there? They have hair everywhere. Why is it just growing out really long right there? But I do find it really funny, so I had to add it to Graystripe. It gives him a little bit of authenticity. I also went with a lot of rounder shapes for Graystripe, which I also thought was good for in comparison to Firestar, who has a lot of more triangle shapes. I also wanted to make sure that his gray was a very warm type of gray, so that it made him look a little bit more nostalgic, if that makes sense. And then I shade him in a very soft airbrush kind of look. I also used the same technique for the highlights, so it keeps a consistent texture. And here's the boy! He kind of reminds me of a Don Bluth character, and I absolutely love that. Aw yeah, the emo bad boy, it's Scourge! Scourge was basically the Bill Cipher of Warrior Cats. He was super edgy. He had dog teeth in his collar. What? And he had super big claws. He was basically the big bad well, one of the big bads of Warrior Cats. And so, of course, tons of people loved him. So I wanted to have a nod to him being the super emo, edgy cat that everybody always drew, and I gave him huge bangs. I know that doesn't technically fit in with the 80s aesthetic, but I'll make one small exception for Scourge. I wanted to give him a super dynamic, menacing looking pose, really like showing his claws and how big they are, but I also had to keep it within the Care Bears look, so he didn't get too crazily evil looking. He still looked pretty huggable. If I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that he was supposed to be a super small cat. Like, he was very itsy-bitsy compared to all the rest of the cats, which I actually think is a pretty fun dynamic. He actually kind of ended up looking like a Pokemon, which I'm not at all upset with. For coloring, I couldn't actually go with pure black for his fur because it would not show up very well against the lines. Especially since it's kind of hard to tell here, but the lines are actually a very dark brown, so it would not show up really at all against the black. And I also made his collar purple. Apparently, in the Wikipedia, it says that it's described in the book as purple, which I always thought it was red, and apparently a lot of other people did too, because every time I see Scourge fan art, it's always red. You know, now that I'm really looking at him, he definitely has more of an 80s anime look to him instead of an American 80s, but I definitely think that it works for him. It gives him a more of a striking and ominous look compared to the friendly, round little kitties. He definitely has the most shading done to him because the black that I chose didn't really have a lot of definition, so I really had to work to give him some kind of form, and it makes him look a little more menacing. And here he is. He's definitely one of the ones who has deviated the most from the book, but it also made his design very fun. So for the last cat, I wasn't originally sure which one I should do, but I ended up with Brightheart because I feel like she would have one of the most interesting designs considering half her face is gone. And some of you actually requested her, so I know that she must be at least slightly popular. I also wanted to try and do her original book description justice because in the official art, her ear is still there even though it's described that she's got a chunk missing. So for her general design, I wanted to make her a lot longer and taller than the other three. So I used a lot of rectangles and squares in her design, but I also used a little bit of triangles, but not nearly as much as Firestar. I used a lot of straight, precise lines for the rest of her body, so it made her scar look very jarring, so you didn't think that it was just maybe a part of her fur, if that makes sense. I wanted to make it look very obvious that it was a scar. I also don't like how in the official art it looks like just her eye is taken out, because if so, that is a very precise surgical job done by that other cat. Like, he must be a professional. I was originally going to put this little gap in the middle of her tail there, but I decided that it took away from her main scar. Like Graystripe, I wanted her to look super huggable, like you just wanted to squeeze her. I almost wanted her to have a kind of Beanie Baby look. And for her colors, I wanted to use a lot of super pastel, very warm kind of reds and oranges. And pink. I wanted to use a lot of pink. I'm pretty sure this detail is mentioned in the books, but I wanted to give her a whole lot of spots. I even gave her one that was ever so slightly heart-shaped near her tail. I also gave her stripes on her tail because I felt it would be a good way to reinforce the kind of very straight, precise lines. And I used a whole lot of warm tones for her shading, including the highlights. I used like a very light pink. And here she is. I'm definitely super proud of this one. I feel like she matches the description and the image a lot of people had in their heads of her better than the official art did, like that bit of her ear being gone. Now, let's look at the final reveal with the background. So those were my 4 warrior cats designs. I'm super happy I got to do this because I really like warrior cats. It's something that I've liked for a really long time, but I never really gave myself the opportunity to do any fan art for it, so this was the perfect chance. If you guys liked this idea and you want to see me do more warrior cats, definitely let me know in the comments who you'd want to see me do. Who was your favorite that I did in this video? Thank you, and goodbye!